Hello, and welcome to the next installment of the virtual ICL webinar series, Intercultural Learning and Inclusive Teaching for the New Virtual Paradigm, brought to you by the Center for Intercultural Learning, Mentorship, Assessment, and Research at Purdue University. I'm Annette Benson. This series is brought to you every other week of the spring and summer of 2020 as we negotiate the new realities of COVID-19 and what it means for study abroad and virtual intercultural learning. In the first half of our webinar series, CILMAR has been focusing on putting intercultural learning into the distance learning environment as COVID-19 caused quick pivots in study abroad plans. In the second half of the series, we turn our attention more fully toward creating classrooms which are inclusive.
Hi there, I'm Chris, and I just want to welcome you to the webinar today. I want to say a special word of thanks to Natasha Harris for making this happen. She put a lot of effort into recruiting students and, fleshing out this topic with solid research and adding her own unique voice to the recording that you're going to watch in just a minute. So thank you very much, Natasha. Just to give you a little bit of introduction for her, she is a wonderful colleague that we have in the College of Science, where there's a very strong program office of multicultural programs, and Natasha is the assistant director for science diversity over there. So I'm going to let her take over and introduce the video to you. Just to give you a sense of the general sort of agenda for today, we have a video recording of a webinar that has already aired, and then Natasha is going to be around afterwards for the live Q&A. So I hope you enjoy it, and take it away, Natasha.
Hi, thank you, Chris, for that warm welcome and introduction. This topic of colorism really hit home for me, and seeing how it impacted the students in their day-to-day learning, both in the classroom and online. I really wanted the faculty and staff to focus on those small nuances that our students deal with on a day-to-day basis. So the students were very honest about their experience that they had with this topic. So I hope that you enjoy, I hope that you learn, and I am here for any questions that you have at the end of the video. Thank you. All right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining this webinar hosted by CILMAR and the College of Science, the Multicultural Science Programs. My name is Natasha Harris. I am one of the assistant directors in the Science Diversity Office, and I am so excited to have you all here virtually. So apart, but yet together. So today's webinar, we're going to talk about color, and we're going to really talk about the difference of how skin tone or complexion plays a part in the educational process. Some of our objectives that we have is actually defining colorism. What is it? Identify ways that colorism can affect our students, and identify implicit biases regarding skin complexion. So our format today, I'm going to give just a brief introduction, some purpose of why we're doing colorism, and then I have a short 15-minute video, just shy of 15-minute video, of a few students who want to share their experience with colorism, and then we're going to open it up to you guys to be able to ask questions to the students, to myself, and then hopefully we will have a wonderful dialogue. So the reason why I wanted to do this, I wanted to be very intentional, and looking at Purdue's Steps to Leaps program, I wanted to focus on very much on everything that happens. As you know, the Steps to Leaps, we're looking at an intentional way of how we're doing programming, how we're sharing information. So this is just a little information about what we're doing. So talking about colorism. In 1983, Alice Walker used the term colorism to describe preferential treatment of the same race of people based solely on their color. So within a particular race, such as African American, there are a variety of shades, beautiful. And growing up I know that I was a product of colorism. Back then, didn't know the exact term, what it meant, but I have been called everything from like bright, dirty red, Chiquita banana, and some other terms. And also having friends that are a different, darker shade than I can see that there was a difference the way that I was treated and the way they were treated. And sometimes you can even go back further to slavery. You had your house slaves that were primarily lighter skinned individuals, and then you also had your field slaves that were more of the darker hue that worked in the fields from sun up to sundown. Now, the reason why I was thinking about colorism, and please don't judge me for this, I was watching a reality TV show called Love and Hip Hop Miami. And there were three ladies who are aspiring rappers, if you will, and they were all Latina from different parts. One was from Cuba, Mexico, and then one from, I think, Colombia. And they were all of different shades. And they had this argument one night about how the darker individual from Cuba who identified as Afro Latina was being treated a lot differently. Like her career was not taking off as well as the other two because they were able to kind of be easily adapted into mainstream because one was very fair and could pass for white. So they just kept going back and forth about the struggles that they each had to go through to represent their culture as being Latinas and then also how their complexions played in. So that kind of got me thinking about how is this playing in education, in higher education today? So when we look at colorism, colorism is a social phenomenon like racism that leads to disparities and inequalities between groups. There have been shown studies regarding color that lighter skinned individuals are treated more favorably. And even doing some of the research for this webinar, I found out that out of the African American population that are convicted of a crime, 60% of a darker skin complexion individuals receive harsher sentences than those committed of the same crime that may be more light skinned. But when we're looking at the relationship between skin tone and also suspensions, when we're looking at K through 12, there was a study published in 2013 that found that students of African American girls with darker skins were 3 times more likely to be suspended from school than those of lighter skin tones. So, why is this important? We're in higher education. One, it starts to attack the confidence, the abilities of those individuals going into higher education. They may not think that they are as smart as their counterparts or as those in their same race of a lighter skin complexion. There's also colorism displayed by educators that stems from implicit bias. People who are darker skin tone may be perceived as aggressive, unapproachable, versus those who are a lighter skin tone that are not perceived that way. So that is kind of the purpose and the reason why we have this webinar for today. And so now I'm going to jump into a video that I want to share that gives you an idea of what the students experience.
Hello, my name is Lisi Skiba. I am a junior majoring in biology from Bloomington, Indiana, and I identify as a Latina.
Hello, my name is Bryce Hibler, and I'm a recent 2020 Purdue graduate. I majored in applied statistics with a minor in management. I am from Fishers, Indiana, and I'll be working full-time at a company called Epic starting in July.
Hi, my name is Maya Black. I just graduated in May with a double major in genetics and cell, molecular, and developmental biology, and a Spanish minor. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I identify as a Black woman.
Although I have experienced and seen instances of colorism firsthand, I have never wanted to look differently than I do. I am very fortunate to be surrounded by people who have encouraged me to be proud of the way that I look and who have helped me to build the confidence to be comfortable in my own skin.
So how do I feel about my own skin color? fine. It's not something I really thought about whenever I was growing up. I hadn't really, well, at least within the community, I should say. I grew up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. I always knew it was different. There wasn't like a question about that. There wasn't necessarily things told directly to me about being like too dark or anything like that. But I definitely coded, as like a Black person within the context of where I grew up and was treated as such in different ways.
I love my own skin color, but that was not always the case. Growing up in a predominantly white area, everything I saw and heard complimented those with light complexions. In the media or in person, it felt like white or light skin was the right skin. At one point, I even wanted to lighten my skin to be seen as more beautiful. But now, I'm so glad I didn't, because I wouldn't want anything else than my nice, smooth, great looking chocolate skin.
I remember noticing very young that my skin was darker than many of those around me, including that of my family, my teachers at school, and my peers. Although the darkness of my skin is something that I have always been aware of, for a long time I was unsure if this was a positive or negative characteristic. Over time, I began to realize that the color of my skin influences the ways others perceive me and the experiences I have in life, whether I want it to or not. However, I believe that my skin color is representative of who I am and that it is something to be proud of.
So I think some of my experiences with colorism from a world standpoint, like I am still Black and have had bad experiences because of that. Even like Meghan Markle, who you would really have to question, like her ethnic background is still subject to like racist abuse all throughout the UK and honestly the rest of the world. I think within the community, there's an obvious sense of privilege. I'm fairly pale to be lighter skinned, to be like a Black person. There is definitely a double standard between like men and women and others, and what having a lighter skin tone, confers to you, and the idea of like beauty standards, how you're treated as feminine or potentially more masculine, different personality characteristics that are ascribed to you. And I'm saying this just like within culture as stereotypes, but also, from different experiences of myself. Like I've had a lot of assumptions about like my ethnicity, or who I date, or, the kind of friends I have and that kind of thing. But the point that I want to make is that even within like my own community, within the Black community, even if there are negatives that do potentially disenfranchise me a bit from the community, that overall the benefits that I reap from being like a lighter skinned Black woman far outweigh the negatives in the context of the world. And that's kind of like the most important point at the end of the day, I think, is to remember that.
I've had people ask me what part of Africa I'm from, or tell me that I've disappeared when the lights go off. These juvenile attempts at humor sadly started when I was young and still have not stopped. You would think being in college and becoming educated would change some people's perspectives, but it simply is not the case. Colorism has affected me in many ways. I have to smile or else I appear aggressive and threatening. A debate with others labels me as confrontational and not passionate. What would be considered a spirited discussion is a heated argument for me. I put a hoodie on, I'm automatically a thug instead of just wearing comfortable clothes. I am forced to constantly think of the image I am putting off and how I may be portrayed in others' minds.
Traditional media can, in some instances, lay the foundation for colorism. Media platforms such as fashion magazines and advertisements portray certain skin colors as more beautiful or more desirable. For instance, many clothing advertisements on billboards or in shopping malls rarely feature dark-skinned people. Similarly, the red carpet at the Oscars is rarely traveled by dark-skinned actors or filmmakers.
I think examples of colorism in traditional media, everywhere, honestly. I think of a lot of the shows that I see that even do have Black people in them, or do have like Latinx people in them, Middle Eastern people. Most people, especially the women, are lighter skinned, and there's a lot of, connotations with like femininity, if you are lighter skinned, or there's more like connotations of like masculinity if you are darker skinned. And I think you see that a lot, especially in the context of like Black women, because there's already a lot of issues in popular culture with like masculinizing Black women, but you see that a lot more in women that are darker skinned. You know, like Michelle Obama, like a woman I always see in dresses with her hair done. You know, like how many jokes have I heard about her being like a trans woman, or about her like secretly being a man that, you know, dresses a woman's clothes for a whole life, which has a whole another connotation of transphobia that can be addressed later. But same with Serena Williams. There's so much artwork that you've seen like in news cartoons and that kind of thing, that always masculinizes her and compares her as like an ape or a gorilla. Same with Leslie Jones, and I can continue down the gamut and keep running it because there's just so many examples of it. You know, like the thing, whenever somebody says like I want to cast a Black woman, like they shouldn't necessarily look like me. We should have more shows where I can see people of like varying skin tones, and wherever those women and those men are in those shows aren't being coded as criminals, they aren't being coded as like some kind of second class person. You know, they're still the forefront of the plot, of love interests. I always say like the only show where I see like dark skinned Black women shouldn't be like only Insecure.
The media has been getting better in recent years, but still has a long way to go for colorism. We glorify the light-skinned, long-haired mixed girl, while the dark-skinned, natural-haired woman is nowhere to be found. People fail to grasp the importance of representation in the media. Children are very impressionable, and if all they see are these straight-haired, light, bright women, that's all they will want to attain. We naturally like to group with those similar to us, and there's no problem with that. But in a classroom setting, being the only Black student places me at a disadvantage. Everyone has their little friends and groups that they can rely on to learn with. It's not that I feel excluded, but I never felt exactly welcome, so I studied alone. We are required to adapt to white concepts, and the reverse is never expected from them. I always thought, why do I have to fit in when they would never do the same for us? And then to be dark-skinned on top of all that, where many see us as the stereotype of unintelligent and violent, before I've even spoken, leads to a more reclusive style of learning, where I attempt to teach myself difficult information.
While less apparent on the surface, colorism does play a role in education and schooling. For instance, expectations of students can vary tremendously based on their skin color. With this in mind, it is important to realize that those who engage in colorism in education may not realize they do so. No matter what space I enter, my skin color always ensures that I am perceived as a person of color. It also ensures that my identity as a Latina is never questioned. With this being said, entering a space where my skin color is much darker than those around me makes me feel as though I stand out. Sometimes this is uncomfortable, as I fear that being the darkest skinned person can shape others' perceptions about me in a negative way, or lead to incorrect assumptions based solely on my appearance.
So what role does colorism play in education and schooling? So I would definitely say a significant role. Again, I think at the end of the day, a lot more has to do with race and how you code at the end of the day, and especially what it means to be like a woman in academia versus a man in academia, and different expectations and questions that arise from that. Is always interesting. And I know that even if I do have issues, that because like I am a lighter skinned person, there is a privilege indicated with that. And the issues that I have will never amount to the severity of people that are darker than me, that they will most likely have also. So I do want to make the differentiation that even within like the same race, like it's going to potentially be a bad experience. If anything is going to potentially be a bad experience because I'm Black, it's going to be worse for those that are darker than me that are also Black. I think the same is kind of plays out in education and schooling. A lot of, academia and a lot of education and going through college is understanding how to fit in, trying to form an identity and finding people that are like you. And that's hard to do. I think there's also been like research. I remember I came across it in like my AP Psych class in high school. People that are that are remembered as being smarter are remembered as lighter in skin tone than they actually are in reality. So like we have so much cueing and coding in the world towards, you know, smartness and education and manners and correctness being indicated with like lighter skin tones, you know, white people. There's definitely those same issues that kind of pop out due to colorism, I think, at the end of the day. And again, that is like within the community, but also just the world at large. I think to understand how to use privilege and how to understand how to use different gazes and that kind of thing to take advantage of them, to call other people out. And I do try to, like, it is a responsibility on my part to try to call out colorism and try to create like a better avenue for having conversations around it. To get people to admit their privilege is always hard, and people get defensive about it. You know, but it still is something that needs to be done. And I can try to facilitate those conversations, especially if you're coming within, you know, a more privileged group and you're a part of that group and having to start that conversation. Sometimes people have, you know, better conversation with you than if they would view like the other having a conversation with them, because they think they're going to be more defensive or offensive even, which is ridiculous. And it's the same, I think, same ideas with race. Like there's a reason we need, you know, white allies that can talk to other white people that are going to kind of segue into different topics of racism, and the same counts within other communities of color also. Because there's obviously issues of prejudice between communities of color in addition to larger issues of racism in the world.
I believe the first step to resolving the issue of colorism is to start seeing and understanding it. Furthermore, it is important to realize that colorism affects and hurts people whether light or dark skinned. Recognizing your own biases that may lead you to engage in colorism is an essential step to developing an understanding of the issue. Although this may not solve the problem in its entirety, it is a step in the right direction.
I want to start off by saying I hate the phrase "I don't see color" because I certainly see color. Color is beautiful because it shows our differences and uniqueness. I'm not going to lie. I have colorist thoughts sometimes. I do not let them affect my actions. I think a possible solution is beginning with education. So many people have no idea of the consequences of their microaggressions. Learning the effects of colorism will hopefully help some people change. Next is accountability. Calling people out on their foolishness can be a frightening thing to do for some Black people when you are the only one, but the silence of others is demeaning. White people I thought, actually not thought, hoped that I could count on have repeatedly let me down as allies. Even in the Black community, this is something we could work on. Speaking up and holding others responsible for their words and actions might better us one person at a time. Thank you.
So with that video, I just want to say, one, we are educators, regardless of the position that we hold, being a faculty member, associate or assistant or tenure faculty member, or even being a staff member who works with these students on a day in, day out basis. This is something that continually affects what the students deal with. And when we're looking out outside of the classroom, when they enter in a space where they know, one, they're already going to be judged either based on their gender, based on their major, or based on their cultural identity, then when we have that, all that other stuff, that junk that is, filling their head about them maybe not feeling good about themselves or going to be taunt or teased afterwards, or, having those thoughts of, I need to just keep quiet, silent, and just stick to myself because I do not want any type of judgment to come back to me. That is going to affect the participation that you see from the students. How many of us, when we're in the classroom and we're asking questions, we have a lot of students who are just very quiet. But then when we engage with them outside of the classroom, either during office hours or one-on-one meeting, their voices come alive. And that's because they don't have the stress and the pressures of having to quote unquote show or prove themselves in a setting full of others who are going to be there to judge them. Now, you may think not everybody out there is to judge, and that is correct. Not everybody out there is judging, but the judgment that we have in our head, the years of constantly being picked on, if that's your case, being bullied, or just hearing those jokes about your particular skin color or those stereotypes that individuals have about particular race, it still feeds on the students and it can affect their performance. Luckily, sometimes students will take that energy and I'm gonna work twice as hard. I am going to do everything that I need to do, and they are going to thrive in the academic setting. Some will allow those negative thoughts that they have inside of their head to get to them, and then they're going to crash and burn. And usually, when I'm talking with a student, I just tell them to take a moment and breathe, push out all of those thoughts because the only person you're in competition with is yourself. Nobody else in that particular space matters. You need to be true and authentic to yourself. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this segment on colorism. But now I know you're tired of hearing me, but I want you to hear from the students. So we do have the students here. So first we're going to have Bryce Hibbler. For one, congratulations, you are a spring 2020 graduate, is that correct?
Yes.
And so where are you at and where are you going?
Well, right now I'm at my parents' house, but I will be going to Madison, Wisconsin, basically about 2 weeks to start my full-time position at Epic healthcare software industry.
Okay. And what was your major here at Purdue?
Applied statistics.
Okay. And next we have Lisi Skiba.
My name is Lisi. I'm a rising junior at Purdue, and I'm majoring in biology. And I'll be back at Purdue next year.
And Maya Black.
I just graduated in May also with double majors in genetics and cell molecular and developmental biology. I'm currently interning with the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers, although I'm doing that virtually. Next up is hopefully Fulbright in January, as long as everything stays calm. So, and then I'm applying to med school in June of next year.
Okay. And we have Diego Alvarez. You did not see him in the video, but he was able to substitute for someone who had to pull out for personal reasons. So I am thankful for him. So Diego, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi. So my name is Diego. I'm from Puerto Rico, and I'll be a junior this fall.
Thank you. So with that, I have a question for any one of the students who want to answer. When I sent the call for volunteers for this particular webinar for colorism, why did you want to participate? Why did you want your story to be heard?
I think I really wanted to participate in this webinar because colorism is an issue that, while it is very present, it's just something that we don't talk about a lot. And it's something that a lot of my peers at Purdue, at least, were not terribly aware of, even if they had thoughts of colorism themselves. So I wanted to participate in the webinar to just help make other people aware that it is an issue that affects my life, but also affects the lives of a lot of other people.
Anybody else would like to answer?
Yeah. So when I saw the email, I was glad that finally I heard of it because the 2 years I've been at Purdue, I had never gotten any like information on anything regarding the topic of colorism. So I was glad that finally it was introduced to my life because like I've suffered from it these 2 years there, and not only at Purdue but like back home also. Within the Latino community, we see it a lot. So thanks, Natasha, for bringing it up.
So another question that I want to ask, in the classroom, when you're in the classroom, and I know that you answered this in the video about how colorism affects the educational setting, but what experience have you had dealing with the incident of colorism, or that you felt was judged based on your color, your skin tone?
So I kind of want to put in the context of like colorism within the community, I guess, but also like just the world at large has more to do, I think, with race than like your actual skin tone. Um, so like one of my worst experiences, I think, at Purdue was the day after the election, my freshman year, where I started out in the College of Agriculture, which is over 90% white. It was the day after the election, and a kid told me, you know, the reason I was here was because of affirmative action. Um, you know, like I work very hard for everything that I do. I came in as a Beering Scholar. Like I was literally one of the best applicants to Purdue. But to have people be able to reduce that to like my skin tone and my race is extremely frustrating. And it's something that you have to always consider, like when you're in the classroom, you always have to be the best. You have to be better than the best because people always underestimate you and question why you're there. So I think that kind of really set the tone for my time at Purdue. And it's something that like still I don't think Purdue really has a lot that they want to offer to really talk about race and talk about like the experiences of minority students at Purdue. But that's probably like my most pressing thing that occurred, and then obviously things follow up to that. But that was probably like the most stressful like thing that, you know, still kind of follows me to this day.
Okay, here's one question. In your experiences at Purdue, what, if any, have faculty and staff done to make you feel more supported and appreciated? And then there's another question. On the flip side, are there times that faculty and staff had made you feel less than or singled out?
I've had times where the support and appreciation, especially from I would say professors of color, but also I mean there are some here and there where like I really enjoy. They when I reach out to them, I feel like it's for everybody. They just want to help, and they see if you're struggling, like they don't let you just keep on falling down. But on the flip side, times that they made me feel less than / singled out is really where I've I've tried to reach them, say in the classroom setting, and I may not be fully understanding, grasping a concept, and instead of like helping walk me through, it's more of making me feel like I'm dumb, I'm an idiot for asking that type of question. And so then like it was said by I think somebody else in the video, you kind of just you pull back and you're like, okay, well the professor is not going to really give me that type of attention during class, and you may not be able. I've had some professors I haven't been able to reach them outside of class. Their office hours are messed up during times where I can't even attend, and it basically just feels like, oh, I'm kind of on my own in that sense. And with that, it can be extremely frustrating when you think, oh, this person is supposed to be on my side, supposed to help me, and I just feel like I'm not getting that full support from them.
Does anybody else want to respond?
I can. So I think that in some instances, I've noticed that when I'm the only person of color in one of my classes, especially classes that are like 30 people or less, sometimes it seems like the professor has noticed definitely me in particular, just because I look differently than the rest of the students. But this can be a little bit awkward because I can tell that they notice, but sometimes it seems like they don't know how to like handle that. And it seems like they overcompensate sometimes to try to make it seem like, you know, they treat me the same as everybody else. And sometimes that can be a little bit awkward, as I said before, but also it does make me feel a little bit singled out because it seems like they can't look at me as just a student. They have to kind of think about, well, she's a student and, you know, X, Y, and Z, instead of just starting on a level playing field with everybody else.
Okay. So there's a follow-up to that question. regarding faculty and staff. And it is, what can faculty and staff do to make you feel more supported other than just avoiding the negative behaviors that you gave examples to?
Yeah, sorry. I think just understanding more of what is going on more than anything, and like police your own faculty and staff. In addition, like people need to hold each other accountable. Um, you can decide if this is something important to you or not. And if it is something important to you, then you need to go into it wholeheartedly. Um, and that's at risk of potentially creating awkward relationships between you and other people. Um, but it's something that, like, if you're not willing to make yourself more uncomfortable to help others that are already uncomfortable, then like maybe you need to potentially examine why that's something that bothers you, and how you can work to kind of overcome that. So I think that's like my biggest thing. Like, you can have one quote unquote good person, but if that's not being spread throughout the rest of the ranks, like it's not really going to do anything on a large scale.
Okay. So I have another question from the audience. In what ways have your experiences with colorism affected your family or your support network, whether it's in how they have had support, while they have had to support you through these experiences, or carry that burden or pain alongside with you?
So I feel like my family has also carried like the burden of everything. For example, like I've been told, um, I've been called out by professors for being, dark skinned, and they rapidly like start saying that I'm international and stuff like that. So whenever I tell things like this to my mother, like, or my family, they they can't do anything basically. So they just have to live with it. For example, another thing that has happened to me various times is that um, I try to speak Spanish sometimes, like on classrooms or anything, and I've been told to shut up because like Spanish is not the language there. So I feel like my family has had to just live with it because there's really nothing they can do about it.
If there's something that you want the audience to know about your dealings with colorism, what would that be?
I think, like, just understand that there's a lot more like intra-community politics that a lot of people don't understand. Goes on. There's politics between like different communities, color, and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of the time, like, people get like not necessarily mad, but like just don't understand. Like, whenever I'm talking about like connotations of like racism or connotations of colors, I'm not talking about like white people versus every community of color, and people get like mad and reductionist about that. I think there's like obviously larger structural issues where like every community of color has kind of been oppressed, but there's also a lot of issues that go on between communities and even within communities that a lot of people just don't know about. So like before you make an assumption, or before I think you get mad about something, it's important to kind of understand like the context of like why people are talking about it, and just like see how it like kind of formed and how it kind of plays out now, and who's being harmed by it is important.
Lacey, you want to respond to that question as well?
Colorism is something that you might engage in, but you might not realize it. And so part of like working to maybe remedy this issue, like some of the first steps may just be to sort of develop a better understanding of the biases that you have personally that may lead you towards these tendencies. Because once you recognize them, even if it's really uncomfortable, it would be the first step into possibly not allowing it to influence your actions.
Bryce, how about you?
I've like since a young age, not so much in college. I used to always get in trouble for things that I just felt like I just weren't as bad as they made it seem, or like other people would be involved, but for some reason I was served with the harsher punishment. And my mom always gave me the analogy. She basically threw a bunch of salt on just a white napkin, and she was like, "Okay, there's all this salt on this napkin. You see this, right?" And then she put a little pepper on the top, and was like, "That's that they see you. This is how they see you, singled out. Like, so when you do something different, when something different out of the norm is done, it's very obvious to them. it's a glaring issue. And with that, it's just really hoping that others can understand that with the things that they do, how they talk, how some of their actions are towards us is like she said, there are microaggressions, there are different things that can kind of put you down. And as if you're not in that strong headspace to continue to like, oh, well, you know, this is not going to bother me because I've been dealing with this my whole life. It can really tear some people down. So
Okay. Have another question. Where are some of the safe spaces on campus, and what was it about those spaces that made you feel safe and comfortable about expressing yourself?
I was gonna say the BCC, the Black Cultural Center. That was my little spot. That's where I ended up. I joined the choir there and everything that I had never sang before, and it basically was a place where for not only academic but also cultural expression, where I felt being around people myself. I don't have to kind of adapt. I can be myself. I can be the little uh, nerdy kid, but who still loves different things. But like, it's not seen in a negative light. They're not out here saying, "Oh, you're not black enough" or something like that. And like, it's hilarious. I've never heard that from a black person. It's literally only other people who decide that they're the ones who want to tell me what I should be and how I should act. So being in the VCC, that's a place where I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely home.
Lisi, where's your safe space?
So I think my safe space, I spend a lot of time at the Latino Cultural Center, and I think that's definitely become like a place where that I rely on to like have discussions, but also just to not worry about other instances that happen like around campus. And I think what makes it a safe space is partially that a lot of people there can relate to the experiences that I have had and understand some of the same feelings. But I think also it's a safe space because the staff there, as well as the people, are very open to hearing all kinds of stories and are open to just like learning more about like students as well as student experiences. And so I feel like it's, even though there are conversations that are uncomfortable, being in a place where or at least for me, being in a place where I feel comfortable, like talking about things that maybe are labeled as like touchy topics with people who I know won't be judgmental or who will listen to what I have to say. I think that definitely makes a space safe.
Maya and then Diego.
So for my past, well, I guess the past 2 years, junior and senior year, I worked with the Honors College as a student diversity officer. So we put on a lot of events and workshops and trainings. And I always said that that was like my sane space. Like that's what let me keep my sanity while I was at Purdue. And they do a lot of great events all throughout the year. I mean, I know the team is still going. And I definitely would encourage you to check out some of their stuff. I'm not a very social person, so more my room, I think, was my like kind of peace space. A lot of books, I think, were also like my space of peace, or like TV shows. So yeah, less I think on a physical level, but more being able to just put myself in a space that was like conducive to my health. But I think a lot of the issues of like having safe spaces and what like makes a safe space is I don't know if anybody's heard of like the personal is political, like places where I don't have to have my like personal experiences talked about in like a political context, or if you're going to be for or against like my experience, like my lived experience that like I'm not going to argue about you with. Just spaces like that, I think, is where people feel most safe. And I think that's like why a lot of it ends up being like the cultural centers and things like that.
So for me, a safe space on campus is any place I feel welcome. For example, like Lizzie said, the Latino Cultural Center, you can walk in there any time of the day. You can talk with whoever you want, and you won't be looked at differently.
Our last question to round off this hour would be, if you have taken online classes, how are those online courses, the interactions change or don't change how colorism plays out?
To me, honestly, it sounds bad, but I enjoy it. With my name, Bryce Hibbler, like, I mean, that's a pretty, I don't know, you can't say, oh, that's a Black name. Oh, that's, like how people like to label it. And if you say you haven't seen my face, all we've communicated with is emails and discussion boards. How can they basically decide to go against that? And I know I've talked about professors earlier, but I feel like also a big thing is the classmates. Sometimes dealing with some very ignorant classmates can be just challenging and exhausting, where it's like, well, why do I have to put all this effort to make you understand some of these things? Like, and they just are stuck in their ways. So I say, with being online, in a sense, especially like Zoom meetings, I don't ever have my camera on. So everything's anonymous basically for me. Like, you don't see that color in my writings because you wouldn't have any idea. So it's bad to say, but it's kind of better in a sense of colorism, but like, it's still that support and access for some people who may not have that same internet access or different challenges with working online.
So what I hear you saying is that the example that your mom gave with the salt on the napkin, in online classes, you're all salt. You can see no difference. In your homework assignment, you're graded for the work that you produce. But once people either can identify your name as being an ethnic name or see an image or a picture of yourself, then it kind of turns into the little sprinkles of pepper where you're kind of like out against that white background. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
This is something that Diego and Bryce both points of this up, but Purdue has a fairly high international population. In particular, in computer science, we have a very high fraction of international students. Other than people mistakenly assuming you're not from the US, what other impacts does that have on colorism that you find?
I think for me, it's kind of one of those interesting kind of like intra-community kind of things. There's a lot of difference, I think. Like, I'm going to speak from the perspective of like a Black American student versus like international Black, mostly African students. There's different assumptions, I think, between like immigrant populations and those that are like native, African American. There's a lot of issues of like just differences in like economic status. But I definitely see like more discourse towards like, oh, they're different than like American Black students. Like, oh, they're more hardworking, like they're smarter. But like, if you want to go, like, I think it's really just like a perfect example of like racism in the US, like kind of works to keep down certain groups. Because if you want to argue like there's something genetically different between us, like there literally isn't. We're both Black. They just happen to be from like, Africa, and I happen to be from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I think there's different things that play out like across those kind of issues. I think that happens more in community. I don't know if people necessarily realize like that there is differences going on. They might be like playing into that.
I think in working with some international students, I know some students have issues with where they're from, of professors and staff members trying to guess based on their physical features where they actually may be from. If you're from China versus Japan versus Korea, and so forth. A lot of the times, as far as skin complexions, they don't have that, but looking at the geography of where they're from, their identity, and especially since everybody is proud of where they're coming from, their cultural background, sometimes that is questioned. And then when you have someone who is, I'm going to say hyphenated, because there's this whole series on like hyphenate names like Asian American, Hispanic American, so forth, then you're looking at someone and saying, oh, when you graduate, are you going to go back to your country? And their country is the US because they were born here. They were born in Texas, and they were like, well, yeah, I'm going to go back to America. I'm already here. And so sometimes there's an assumption that everybody who may look or identify as non-US, such as Asian Americans, that they are not from here, or even people from Latin countries as well. And especially those Afro Latinos, sometimes it's very hard to, you know, say, oh, are you Latina or are you African? Like there can't be a mixture or where that's from. So I think that's something that a lot of international students kind of have to deal with from my perspective of working with some of them.
I was thinking not so much what the international students have to deal with as how does it affect domestic students? Does it impact the discussion of colorism? And you brought up a couple of points in ways that it does.
I wanted to add that both my roommates, well, two of my roommates from the past year were African, and they've spoken to me about basically they've had classmates and even professors thinking that they're like, oh, this is like, is this your first time in the U.S.? Like, did you even have running water over in Nigeria? Like they've been asked that from other people. And so in a sense, if you're out here asking me saying like, oh, basically what part of Africa am I from? This is how you see me. This is how you view me. You have kind of placed me in that box where you're putting me along with the rest of them because that's your thought process. Is, oh, well, maybe he is, hopefully you're talking about like the good stereotypes about Africans where it's like they're smart, intelligent, hardworking, but others, it may be so like, oh, well, he's poor, he's a finesser, he's different things where it's like, if this is how, I know it's may seem like a little thing being misidentified, but it's just like, that's not me. And that's how you view me. I really don't necessarily appreciate that.
I would just add too that there's a corollary of colorism within that community. And the message that I get is that it's really dangerous for us to sort of have this essentialist idea of communities, whether it's the African American community or the Latino community or international students as a large, very diverse group. We can't think of them in sort of homogenous or monolithic ways because the experiences that they have are so different. And even just with this one issue of colorism, international students who look more white have a very different experience than people of color who are also international students, and also depending on their accent and the assumptions that we make about what country that they come from. So yeah, I like what Maya and some of the other folks on the panel were talking about with just the diversity within the community is really important to recognize.
I want to thank our students, Diego, Maya, Lisi, and Bryce, especially Maya and Bryce, because they are graduates. They are about to start their new career, and they still looked at their Purdue email and saw something from me and responded. So I have something special coming for you. So here's my information. If you have any type of comments or questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you guys, students. Thank you so much for giving
and thank you very much, Natasha, for taking the time to organize this and host the session and guide the dialogue. Thanks.
I'm sure you learned as much from that as we did. Next up, please stay tuned for the question and answers. For those of you watching this live, please use the Zoom chat function to input your questions for our guest at this time.
Natasha, there's some great questions popping up in the Zoom chat. If you want to go ahead and start fielding some of those, I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you. So I hope you really do enjoy, and looking at the questions in the chat box, I can tell that you have a lot. This has inspired a lot more conversation and maybe, future discussions with your departments, with your areas, and so forth. So looking at one of the questions that Phil was one by Chris regarding how do we find balance and looking at how to support these students. And I think the first thing that we need to realize is that there's an imbalance in that we are actually dealing with. There are a lot of unconscious bias that we have and that we possess, that it just automatically happens. And just because we are in academia doesn't mean that we don't give in to those bias. It just means that we're able to recognize it, analyze it, see where it's coming from, and to change direction. But I think also making sure that the space that you're in, as far as the spaces that the students are coming in, show a nice balance of representation of the student body, of the, you know, wide spectrum of different shades that we may have, will be a first start. And also listening to the students when they're telling you some of the concerns that they're having. It may not just be the coursework, it may be a lot of things that are just adding on top of it that they're having to deal with the stress, because they cannot focus, just like one of the students mentioned, you know, someone telling them to stop speaking Spanish, or, you know, you're in America, we speak English here, and so forth. That carries, because when you are used to one particular language as your primary language, and you're having to, you know, convert or translate, you know, to another, it does not come off, you know, as perfectly as we want it to be. And we have to take that into consideration, that English may not be their first language. Even the students from Puerto Rico that learn both in Spanish and, you know, in English, the translation is a little bit different. But being able to work with the students and understand, instead of just making the assumption that, hey, this is the way it is, this is the way it's done, you just need to assimilate and just get over it. I think that will help with the beginning of the balance. And then it's just listening to individual students and their stories that they have will actually lead to better understanding, and not trying to be the hero or the savior of that student. Sometimes we feel like we want to get into that role of, here's a student, we really like them, they're having a problem, let's just save. A lot of times they just want to be able to vent and to share and just get some resources for them to figure it out on their own. So I think that is helpful. I'm looking down the list. So one was dealing with colorism and looking at the nuances, you know, for faculty and staff who are supporting roles. What does this mean for institutions? And I think if I'm understanding that question correctly, for institutions, we need to realize that just like with diversity, we have intersecting identities, that we are not just put into a box and that is completely where we stay. We don't venture out that box, but we are sisters and brothers. We have different sexual orientations. We may be, you know, mixed with different cultures in us. And so I think institutions need to realize that just because you check the box as Hispanic or Latinx or African American, that is the only thing that you should be identified as, and that the resources that are provided to you should only be related to that. I actually had a student who did not want to participate in the program that I offered because he felt like it was just for Black students, and he wanted to be judged on the quality of his work, not because of the color of his skin. And I had to, you know, reinforce that that's not the purpose of this particular program. We're providing resources, but we're also looking at all the other intersecting identities that you have. And luckily, he was able to kind of break that down. And he's a great ambassador for the College of Science. He speaks with some of the potential students who are coming in on campus, and it's just a way that he has to retrain his thinking. But I think with institutions, we have too much of a problem of just putting people in a box and just limiting them to that one box and not looking at everything else. So if I did not answer that question the way that it was meant, please clarify, and I will come back to that.
Let me just add a quick little thing about at the institutional level. It seemed to me that a lot of the experiences that the students were talking about were caused by the fact that they are such a tiny majority in a primarily white institution. So we can deal with the consequences of that imbalance, but we ought to also be looking at structural changes so that they aren't such a small minority group.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Another question is looking at the safe spaces for the cultural centers. The cultural centers are a great space. They are student driven. They are mainly, student focused, and they are a safe space for students. But having safe spaces all over the campus is not the responsibility of that particular cultural center to be the end all be all or the resource for that one person who may have a multicultural background. So as far as creating safe space, allowing everybody to have an opportunity to speak, even if you're doing it virtually, giving everybody that space. Even when Bryce mentioned he loves online learning because of his name, it doesn't say what race or identifies what race he may be with. So when people are not able to see him, he's able to be more free. So maybe in a virtual space, have where all the cameras are off and there are no names and people can just communicate freely with what they want to communicate about. I think that's a great place. And also for the safe space, I think when students do come to you and try to share things with you, don't try to put your burdens or the things that you may be feeling onto that student. And what I mean by that, this is an example. I had an advisor who was a white advisor. She was advising a Black female, and the advisor had just watched some documentary on TV and then automatically related that to that individual student and try to put everything that she learned and how she felt sad about the situation and how she felt for the student about that, and then started to show her emotions about it, which is great because you're showing empathy. But when you're turning around to the student, where that student who's coming to you for advice, now that student has to comfort you, it makes it seem like you are, suppressing that student's need for that moment or silencing their voice that they have, because now they're like, okay, now I got to take care of this person and make sure that they feel okay with how they're feeling when it's actually me who need the support. So I think during those times to kind of rein in, like if we do watch and we are feeling, especially in this climate that we are currently without the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, saying how sad they feel and, their passion, to realize that that's your feelings, they have their feelings. Let's stay in this supportive role and support the students instead of trying to have the students to support us. It's done unintentionally. I'm not saying anybody goes out with the intention of trying to do that, but that's one of the things that we just sometimes have to just try to rein in and check on ourselves. And another question about Purdue, and sometimes their honesty, I'm just like, don't say that. Just please don't. But I think one of the things that they always communicate to potential students or to transfer students, you have to find that person on campus, that one person who is going to support you regardless of what that support may look like. Even if it's not academics, then that individual is going to be able to refer you to someone to help you with your study habits, refer you to the resources that are here on campus. You have to find your community. If you're looking at the Black Cultural Center, sometimes the Black Cultural Center is not the space for every African American student or African student that is on this campus, and they don't feel connected. A lot of students do, but they find that connection in, say, the African Student Association or the Caribbean Student Association or all the other cultural student orgs that are here on campus. And so looking at high school students or transfer students, when they come here, they're coming here because the environment is something similar to what they're used to. If you're looking at a student from Indiana, depending on the area that you live, Purdue's racial makeup may make up the same in your high school. So it's something that they're familiar with. If it's something that they're not, then it's going to be a hard transition. I work a lot with graduate students, and a lot of the graduate students may come from HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And their homecoming is a big thing. The band is a big thing. And then when they come here and we have the All-American band, they're like, what is this? Like, this is not the football experience that I'm used to. Where's the tailgating? Where's the, this? It's just a different experience where we have to just look and say, this is not what you're going to get here, but Purdue and West Lafayette has their own little gems. And so we just have to look for them into that, particular moment. So those are some of the things that they tell students, to find their person and to find their space here. I'm reading down the list. So some of the helpful resources that I can suggest, I listed them on the PowerPoint presentation that was showed on the videos, some of the articles, some of the documentaries. There was Dark Girls documentaries. They also did one on Light Girls documentary. There are a lot of TED Talks that speak about different dimensions of diversity and how it relates of individuals intersection with everything. So a lot of TED Talks are really good, and those articles actually lead to other articles. So I will take that and just use that as a reference or a foundation. But some of those documentaries, they're a little bit old. I think the latest one was done in 2016 or 2012, something like that. So they do have some updated. Even Dave Chappelle, who's a famous comedian, did a documentary on good hair, which goes through African-American hair and how people, and there's a whole big discussion about African-American hair and how it relates in mainstream, if it should be more natural, if it should not, what people do to fit in. So some of those are really great documentaries to look into. And I think the New York Times, they at times do a whole web series. I think they did a series on the hyphenated culture, so like Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and so forth. So New York Times really does have a nice video library on that. Let's see. Can you talk more about how colorism affects international students, given a diverse background that they represent? For my experience working with international students, I do not work a lot with international students. I work mainly with domestic students, but some of the interactions that I have, when we're talking about colorism and we're talking about race and ethnic backgrounds, this is something that they are not familiar with. Depending on the country that they come from, they don't have this type of separation or divide of race. They don't have it based on the color or the shade of your skin within their own. It could be mainly based on geographic location. It could be based on financial, social, economic status of how that separation. So a lot of international students that I interact with, and I haven't done extensive research on this, so maybe the lovely staff of CILMAR can help set that is one of their focal points. This is something brand new to them. And I know one of the panelists had an experience where she is from here, but she was dining in a dining court and one of the workers came and started speaking Spanish to her. And she didn't know Spanish, which I don't know Spanish either. So we're in this, we have that in common. But he really tore her down and said that she was a disgrace to her race, to her culture, to her background, and that she needs to stop trying to fit in or to be like the white people around her. And it really, really shattered her spirit. And the following day she had an exam and she could not study because she just felt this whirlwind of emotions. Now, again, she was not international, but I'm using that as an example that sometimes depending if there's someone from a different culture who is an American and somebody from their own background, let's just say from, India, they can have that cultural clash within one another that can really be harmful to a student's confidence, to their mental health, to their overall well-being, and that can affect their schoolwork or how well they perform on an assignment or a test or an exam. So that's my experience with international. I'm pretty sure Chris and Annette may have a lot more research-based information to provide for you on that. So do you have anything that you want to add, or do you want to save that for another time?
Well, we should probably wrap up soon, but I will say I've gotten several private comments from people who attended today that were basically, thanking us for talking about this topic, because it's not something that gets talked about very much. And a lot of the comments were about, this is something I need or want to put into my classroom. This is something I want to make my classroom into a safe space and not just have the cultural centers as the only safe spaces on campus. And comments like, I intend to use these resources because I need to find out more about this so I can talk intelligently about people with it. And I think the things that you're saying about the need of international students to talk about things is along those same lines, that the more we have these conversations, the more people who are coming into our culture get exposed to those conversations, but the more we are aware ourselves of the assumptions that you were mentioning earlier and the behaviors that we have that are based on those assumptions, and just to get it out in the open more and have more conversations, I think is really important. So thanks to everybody who was sending me those comments. So I'll wrap up by thanking Natasha again for doing a wonderful job of hosting, and again for putting together the panel in the first place. And I'll turn it over to Annette to wrap us up with the announcement about the next session in our series.
Join us August 10th as our very special guests, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leadership from Purdue University. Join us to answer questions about inclusive online teaching practices that they recommend, the learning outcomes they have for their students, how they measure learning in their programs, and how faculty and staff can support their educational mission. Thank you so much for joining us today. To learn about the next sessions in this series, like and follow us at facebook.com/Purdue CILMAR. Look for updates at purdue.edu, IPPU, CILMAR, Learning, Virtual, ICL. Send questions and comments to silmar@purdue.edu. And as always, continue to look for new resources at the Intercultural Learning Hub. That's hubical.org.